I'd like to welcome our next panel session, which is the Q&A session, our live expert panel. So we are joined by Paul England from Pratt Industries, Joe Meierhoff, who you heard from Strategic Materials, Bob Hippart from OI Glass, Angus Crane from NAIMA, or the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association, and Gordon Kenna from DeKalb County. So welcome to you all. And we will be, and we've got links to their website in the chat. Thank you, Ashley. And we're just going to go through some questions. We'll actually allow all of the panelists to give themselves and their company a brief introduction, just about 5 minutes or so. And then we'll have some follow-up questions individually, and then leave some time for some general questions. So get those questions kind of zooming around in your head. And I'll start by welcoming Paul England from Pratt Industries.
Hey, good morning, everyone. So I'm Paul England with Pratt Industries. I'm Senior Vice President on the Recycle Division. If you don't know much about Pratt, it's interesting. I was able to participate in the last 20 minutes or so of some of the presentations and the back and forth, and it got my mind thinking a bit about our organization. What we do for a living is we make boxes. So when I looked at the companies that are utilizing recycled bottles, recycled glass, we sell boxes to every one of those particular companies. And we partner with companies like Diageo, who use a lot of glass. We make boxes for them to put their materials in. So as a fully integrated company, our challenges are kind of very broad, if you will. We make boxes. We deal with the challenge of putting glass in boxes. We deal with recycling all across the country. Here in Georgia, we have a recycling facility, a couple actually, one on the east side, one on the west side that deal with glass. And we have our paper mills, and I spent the vast majority of my career on the paper mill side. And this may sting a bit, so I'll apologize up front. But when you ask pretty much any paper mill in the country, what is their number one issue with using recycled paper, and they will quickly say it's the amount of glass residual that comes in a bale of fiber. And the reason for that is the glass is like sandpaper when it hits these paper machines. And it's a very high cost issue that we deal with, where the glass will deteriorate the rubber rolls to make paper. But it's part, so we get it, it's part of the process. So we've invested heavily as an industry to remove that high density, heavy material the best we can before it gets to the process. So when I go to our paper mills, the first thing I see is the reject pile, and they're mini mountains of fine glass that we've removed, and staples and chicken bones. Yes, Joe, chicken bones. So that's kind of at a high level what Pratt does, and anxious to be a part of the panel discussion. Marissa, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. I have a question for you before we go on to the next panelist. So sure. There was a mention of kind of how Pratt has treated glass a little bit differently in some of your MRF in Georgia. Can you expand on that a little bit, or even also give examples of how other MRFs in Georgia are retrofitting to accept and recover more glass?
Sure, absolutely. And I don't have a lot of information about other MRFs other than Pratt in the Georgia, but I did take some time yesterday and talk to one of our partners. Probably everybody recognizes the Rumpke organization in Ohio. They have what I think is a kind of a world-class glass processing in Dayton. So I kind of touched base with them yesterday to make sure that the things that I'm still focusing on are very pertinent. But in the state of Georgia, our facility, we have had kind of a significant investment in what we call Atlanta West. And it's to what Joe mentioned earlier, it's the screening. So to capture and clean the 2-inch minus material that comes through the process. And then the next challenge is to get the lightweight contaminants out, like the paper, with air knives and vacuums. That's the technology that is very current. It's the newest technology out there. And one of the things we don't do a glass break before what's called the OCC screen, which is very early in the process. So we dump a big pile of single stream on the tip floor, we push it onto the conveyors, and it starts the process. The first thing we take out is the oversized big cardboard boxes. And in that process, the glass falls through the screen and then hits the 2-inch minus. It breaks the glass as well, most times. And that's how we, quote, break glass in our processes.
Yeah, that's great, Paul. So that kind of gets to Laura's point that of broken glass. On the MRF side, you're trying to break the glass down so you can actually filter it a little bit more to that final product, but also get it out early, as you saw on that GRC best practices. Get it out before it touches the paper, but also so you can recover that glass and it doesn't have to go through the whole process and get contaminated by other recyclables.
Yep,
it's funny what Laura said in her about it's funny and true about recyclables contaminating other recyclables, because the glass processors, I'm going to toss it over to Joe, who could I'm sure talk about this all day. We'll talk about how paper, specifically shredded paper, contaminates glass and becomes a problem. And then the paper manufacturers are like, glass, we don't want glass in our paper. So left hand, right hand, he said, she said.
Sure.
So good segue over to Joe Meierhoff, who we heard from on the last, briefly on the last panel, but now we can hear a little bit more from him. So Strategic Materials, Joe Meierhoff, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, everybody. As myself, as I'm sure everybody else is trying their best to stay healthy and especially watch their weight in this COVID time, because working from home is so easy to, step into the kitchen. My wife was a little upset with me this morning when I came back from the bakery. I told her I had to get donuts for the conference and for everybody there. I was anticipating, 50 people. So I've got donuts for everybody here. I'll have to take care of those, I guess. So, I'm the regional sourcing manager for Strategic. I handle Florida and Georgia, Alabama, parts of Tennessee, and pretty much spend most of my time just traveling around and visiting any sources of glass that I can find to try and help figure the best way to bring that into our facilities for processing. Like earlier it had mentioned, most of the glass that we're processing in the region altogether is bottle or container, post-consumer container glass. But we also have a plant that Ben Hill plant that Laura mentioned is where we process post-industrial plate glass as well. So visiting window manufacturers, auto industry, those sort of things, those companies that would have scrap post-industrial glass, because plate glass is has a different chemical makeup. It has to be handled different, and therefore it has to be collected in a completely separate way from what we do post-consumer glass. It's extremely hard to process it and get contaminants out. So that's collected completely different. We don't have the ability to be able to put it to the optical sorting machines that we have in the bottle plant. So a little bit of difference between the two processing there. But yes, and the challenges in Georgia is as we all know, it's being able to collect enough, and where we get it the most is curbside. So very, very strong focus on curbside partnerships and trying to create solutions to bring some of those tons, to bring some more of those tons in. So happy to answer any questions. I'm not a MRF expert, but I spent a lot of time at MRFs, and so I can answer some questions, and sometimes we can make some suggestions. But any questions on processing? My background is operations. I've managed glass processing plants for 10 years. So I've got a kind of a little bit of a good background with processing glass. So any questions there? Let me have them.
Well, Joe, I was going to ask, I know on our initial word cloud that we have, cost was a big factor. So what do you say to local collection programs about justifying the cost of hauling glass to a processor like SMI or others?
Yeah, cost is along with every commodity. We get to a point where so our end users, the fiberglass industry, the bottle industry, they've got their top limits. What that is, what drives that. The cost of raw materials, the cost of energy to melt the glass, and then essentially what are their abilities, how much to sell that bottle for, or that fiberglass for, and then it trickles down to us and our cost to process it. What's it take to get the collected glass to the specs that they require as furnace ready Collet. So we've got this, they're up here and we get this, and then comes the cost of collecting it from the curbside and getting it to us. And really the two biggest challenges is contamination and logistics. Obviously the weight of the glass is heavy. As Laura mentioned earlier, in logistics, we try the best practices to move the glass. Of course, that's broken. To give you an example, a 20-yard container full of unbroken bottles weighs out at the most about 5 tons, maybe 6 tons if we're lucky. And if you take that same container with broken glass, and you can just about double the weight in it if it's broken. So as you can imagine, your cost per ton and the haul rate is significantly lower with broken glass. But once again, we have our limitations with that. We can't break the glass too small. Once the glass gets broken smaller than really 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 to 1/4 inch, below that, it's really hard for optical sorters to see what it is, what color it is, or even if it's stones or ceramic and that sort of thing. So that's on the logistics side. And then the contamination side, when you look at our operating costs at the plant, landfill ranks right up there with probably part of our highest operating costs at the plant, and that's our landfill cost. And that's just passing through everything that is non-glass residual. So now if you take that non-glass, that contamination, and you figure it in with logistics, and you think about, if we're getting 20% contamination from any collection point, and all of a sudden we're moving that 100 or 200 miles, we're just moving landfill material across the state, and that's where we'll really start spending some money. So we're really driving the importance to get the glass cleaned up at the MRF level, so we don't have to move that, and it essentially saves everybody.
Okay. So you're seeing the cost savings on the MRF side is their initial investment may be a cost, but in the long term, that cycle that we saw that Laura put up, as far as that clean glass turning into new products or that are happening here in Georgia, that's where that cost savings and that circular model is happening.
Correct. And like with our pricing structure, where we essentially pay for cleaner glass and charge more for dirty glass, that's where the MRF see the immediate savings.
Right. As someone who has been dedicated to recycling education, I think it is important for all recyclables to realize that when people put items in that aren't supposed to be in a recycling container, causing contamination, and that longer, more expensive trip to the landfill, that hurts everyone. So it kind of goes back to this idea of education being an important investment in your recycling programs.
Yep, correct. And a lot of that contamination, if it can be managed at the curbside itself, I mean, those tons are just tons that are paid for processing on the MRF side also. So it's just passing tons literally from the household all the way on through, and it's costing everybody a little bit more money, which essentially comes back to that household in the long run. So.
Mm-hmm. Are there, I know, and I'm asking you a lot of questions, but I definitely want to get to other presenters too, but can you think of I know Scott mentioned earlier about quantity versus quality. Are there examples that you've seen? And I know we've kind of been focusing on the Atlanta area, but we are well aware, and we were aware in planning this, that Georgia has a lot of different barriers and end markets in other parts of the state. And could you speak to some best practices as far as capturing glass in a place that's maybe doesn't have processing in their backyard?
Sure. And we're seeing quite an expansion in collections from outlying counties in the area. As stated earlier, the population, everybody wants to recycle glass and wants to do their part, and pressure is getting put back on their municipalities to do their part. So now, how do we get that glass moved those distances? And what we try and do is try and find a way that the glass can be aggregated. So first off, we'll find for example, we'll find a county that has 13 or so collection sites of their own, and we'll take a look at, does that county or area have the ability to collect the glass at each one of those locations, but aggregate it into one location. So there we can have it loaded by a front end loader into a different style trailer where the glass can be broken. Try and create an aggregation site to bunker up several different areas of glass. And or just look at we're seeing some areas that just don't have the ability to do that. So then comes the challenge of overcoming the cost of transportation, to move that glass. So, and that's being done, we're seeing in several different areas. If the population in some areas is demanding that they want to recycle glass, then we see at counties, as we're going to hear from some today, that participate in the cost a little bit more to do what they need to get the glass moved. Or there's some small grassroots collections that are popping up here and there. One of them today, we're going to hear from Teresa from the city of Rome area, where in that case there wasn't any interest in participation from the local government. So Teresa decided to grassroots movement and start a process on her own and do some fundraising from the local community to offset that transportation cost. That's good, clean glass when it's collected like that. We'll pay the maximum that we can there's a value to it, and we certainly recognize that value. If that value is lower than the cost of freight, then we rebate. And if the value is the cost of freight is higher, well, then we've got to figure out a way to bridge that gap. And so we're finding quite a few more little small grassroots movements like that also.
That's great. Wonderful. Well, thanks, Joe. We are going to move on we kind of went almost in the recycled order. So we started with the MRF, then now we went to the secondary processor. moving on to the container glass market with Bob Hippart with OI Glass. Bob, are you able to unmute?
Absolutely. Can you hear me, Marissa?
Sounds good.
Excellent. No, pleasure to be here and represent OI Glass from the manufacturing standpoint. A little background on myself. I've been with OI now for close to 20 years and moved into a sustainability role about 6 months ago. So I'm the global sustainability leader for manufacturing, working with a team of experts within our organization to help figure out ways to not only drive collection, but also on the processing side, and this is really a global look. So we've got facilities, 71 facilities throughout the globe. We're the largest glass producer in the world, and we've got ambitions to hit the requirements, as Scott talked about earlier, on the our 50% post-recycled content usage. And we're trying to make steps with working with various organizations such as this one. So appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about it, as well as answer any questions that people have specific to what's important for the glass manufacturers when it comes to quality, the types of materials we can utilize, etc.
Great. Well, can you talk a little bit about why the container manufacturers? I know OI has a robust sustainability plan. Can you talk a little bit about why you would want to have more recycled glass or more Collet?
Sure, Marissa. So I think a lot of it, again, comes back to some of the prior points that were discussed earlier. For OI and specifically, as Scott talked about, as well as Laura, increasing our recycled content allows us to use less virgin raw materials such as sand, limestone, soda. And so that also allows us to reduce our energy consumption, because as Scott mentioned, glass almost acts, the recycled glass, when we remelt it, almost acts as a catalyst. So it lowers the melting point of that sand, those sand particles, to dissolve it. And so, anything that we can do to increase our recycled content is going to benefit our overall energy usage and our ambitions to hit our recycled content levels. Obviously, for us on the container glass side, color is very important. So understanding the various streams of glass that are coming in, we've got to monitor that very closely. For example, our clear glass that we purchased, or what we call flint, we can only put a certain amount. If there's a bunch of contamination or other colors in that flint glass, it can actually impart, color into the finished product we're looking to make. So we've got to manage all those types versus, we don't have as many of those restrictions when we're trying to make an amber glass or a green glass that you would see on the store shelves. So for us, it's a little different than some of the other markets, and I think Angus is probably going to talk a little bit about that with the fiberglass market. But the investment on the optical sorting equipment that the beneficiators are putting into place, that's really all those things are important to help us meet those goals that we're trying to utilize. The highest levels of recycled content in the products we're producing, for the consumer, for our customers, and ultimately consumers.
Yeah, so you want to have that consistency. If you're looking at a clear glass bottle, you want it to be clear all the way through. And I'm sure that also affects, you want to make sure that the integrity of the bottle is consistent as well. So that's important. One other thing I wanted to touch on, because I think a lot of times we hear the word contamination from a MRF perspective, or even from an end market perspective, but what on the container glass, what would be considered a contaminant for your use of Collet?
No, great question. There's a couple of things. I would say one of our biggest challenges is any sort of metal or ceramic. I think we talked about that earlier. The metals will cause imperfections in the containers, which although they look interesting when the finished product's made, it's not something we obviously want to provide to our customers. So if those imperfections are there, then we have to inspect them out, and now we're just creating more internal recycled glasses, which we're trying to reduce that. So for us, ceramics and metals are very, very bad. Organics can cause challenges for us as well. So whether it be paper, other residual products, if there's significant variation, think about it this way, Marissa, we get material in from multiple vendors at a given manufacturing site at one of our facilities. So if we're getting a product stream that's got, let's say, a 0.5% of an organic type of by weight versus another stream that's got very, very little, down to, let's say, 50 parts per million, that's going to have an impact on our glass color and the glass that we're trying to produce. The last piece I think we just touched on is color. For depending on what color glass we're trying to manufacture, the color parameters or the incoming stream of that glass is very important. We can, like I mentioned, we can manage it a little bit better when we're producing a green or an amber, container. But when it comes to flint containers, we've got pretty strict requirements, and we need to make sure we're able to meet our customers' expectations and the consumer's expectations when it's on a store shelf. And so we're committed to doing that.
That's great. Thanks, Bob. And I'm sure we'll have more questions for you moving forward when we get into the Q&A portion. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. And if there's anything else that comes up, I'm also going to participate in the end market discussion, the brown bag lunch. So if there's something that you want to hold off until then, I'm more than happy to answer that question.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And that's a good reminder, using this chat panel in your dashboard, the little thing that looks like I don't know, like one of those cartoon bubbles when you're talking the chat. You can use that, ask any of our panelists questions. So staying on the end market theme, I would like to pass the microphone on to Angus Crane, who is the president of the North American Insulation Manufacturing Association.
Hi, Marissa. I'm a general counsel and executive vice president. I don't want to take Kurt Rich's.
Sorry, Kurt.
I'm doing it for my own self-preservation, so I'm not. No one thought that I was trying to pass myself off as the president of NAIMA, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be on this call and on this panel. And the fiberglass industry is very, very unique in that it can use a lot of glass that the other glass recyclers cannot use. I'm talking specifically about the green bottle Collet. We can use that as part of our recycling materials. We also are the largest users of glass Collet in the state of Georgia. And as Laura mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we've got 3 fiberglass manufacturers within the state of Georgia. And also we have the Kenna facility, which is technically in Alabama, but it is right on the Georgia border. And so it's like we have 4 manufacturing facilities that rely upon the glass Collet that is produced or made available in Georgia and throughout the Southeast. I think that the other thing that is very important that I like to emphasize is that there is a kind of a multi-layered list of benefits that we get from using glass Collet. And so within the industry, there is a genuine commitment to using glass Collet and a genuine commitment to try to increase the use of that glass Collet. The first is that using the glass Collet saves us an enormous amount of energy, and it takes less energy to melt the glass Collet than if that whole part of that recipe is using sand. So the glass Collet is kind of like a substitute for some of the sand that we use. So not only does it save us energy, but by saving the energy and reducing the energy impact, that has a financial benefit. It saves us money. The other thing that it does is that the glass Collet is less demanding on the furnace, and the use of glass Collet prolongs the life of the furnace, and the life of that furnace is one of the most significant and important financial benefits that you can have. If you can prolong the life of your furnace, that's an enormous impact, because when the furnace has to be kind of reworked or recreated, it means that you have to shut down, and that shutdown is obviously a significant halt in production. And so prolonged furnace life is very, very important. It also is a very important element in our story of sustainability. We have, as an insulation material, we have a laundry list of things that we like to point out to people, that things that we call environmental attributes. One is that our products are used to put into buildings to save energy, that our products actually save energy, and not just for a little moment of time, but for the entire time it is in the building. While in place, it is saving energy. And in saving that energy, reducing the amount of energy that is used in the different buildings where the insulation is there is specific reduction of pollution and pollutants. And we've done a lot of studies with Harvard University, Boston University, to demonstrate the specific pollutant, sometimes greenhouse gases, that are reduced as a result of our use of insulation. That's a very good story to tell. And then we like to add to that list of environmental attributes that we use a recycled content. And the percentage of that recycled content has been growing, and the volume of recycled glass that we're using is increasing. And as Laura indicated, the nice part of the story is that we could use more. The one thing that I wanted to just point out, that I think that our greatest frustration is that there are a lot of people who are completely unaware of the fact that fiberglass uses recycled content. And so we are always eager to have any kind of opportunity to speak or present this story. Scott Miller, who was from Kenna, he and I used to do this kind of, we both come and speak, and we had kind of two very different presentations, but we were both telling the same story. And we were always amazed by the reaction that we got, because people would come up to us after the speech and they'd say, we had no idea. We had no idea that fiberglass would be using a glass collet. And in fact, one of the meetings we went to, they came up to us and, what business does fiberglass have being here at this meeting? And so when we told the story, he was chagrined and came up and says, you know what, I can understand now why you're here. But anyway, Marissa, hopefully I didn't take too much time, but that's kind of the story that we like to tell. So any opportunity you will give me to come and tell our story, I'm eager to be there and show up.
Now that's great. Thanks so much, Angus. And fiberglass is a huge player in the glass recycling industry. And the thing that's interesting to me is that not only do they use the recycled content, but fiberglass in and of itself, you use it in your home or building to save energy within that structure. And so whereas it's not is circular as a bottle to bottle application, but it does have a long life. So that recycled glass is going to have a longer life in the use of fiberglass. So Angus, can you speak to, you mentioned the demand for Collet, and we heard that contamination is something that's on everyone's mind. What is considered a contaminant in the fiberglass industry?
Well, and what we have had to do, and we did this in conjunction with all of our companies, but we created a definition of what was acceptable glass collet, and I'm more than happy to share that with anyone. But there are specific things that really throw off that glass melt, and if you've got contaminant, there can be disastrous consequences. And so it's very important that we have very clean collet If there's contaminated glass collet, it can literally shut a furnace down. It can cause a glass melt outbreak. So we're very, very cautious. It's a safety issue, and so we always want to make certain that we've got clean collet. So in answer to your question, some of the specific contaminants would be ceramic glass, computer glass, one of the glasses that are used in television screens and computer screens. Those would be contaminants. And then, some of the others that would be, contaminants in any scenario. But those are the things that we find frequently that create real problem. And I think that they create a problem because people are thinking, well, they're glass, this should be okay, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's why we see plates and mugs in recycle bins, and I'm like, no. And I think what's interesting about the ceramics piece too is that, and I may ask Bob to unmic too, is that ceramics are both a contaminant in container glass and fiberglass. I would imagine that the electronics glass is the same for container glass that as it is for fiberglass as a contaminant.
Yeah, Marissa, I can answer that real quick. That is correct. Yeah, the same types of glasses that Angus is referencing is also the challenges for us. Anything that's like a much higher temperature melting glass than the container glass recipe is going to be a problem. So we do our best to, and the SMIs of the world do a great job, watching what's coming into their process. Again, education is so important. People need to understand what is recyclable and what's not. Mm-hmm. And so anytime we have a chance to discuss, talking about the various types of glasses, it's very important we have that communication and we're aligned there to minimize that contamination in the final process.
And Joe, thanks Bob and Angus. And Joe, is there a home for some of those, for the ceramics and electronic glass in from SMI's purview?
No, not really. You hear me talk about contamination, I'm talking about paper and plastic and metals and that sort of thing, much more than you hear me talk about ceramics and stone and other types of glass. And partial reason for that is when we understand that we sample every truck that comes in with MRF glass. We take a sample of it and we go through and we measure out contaminants. And in that we'll watch the stones and ceramic and porcelain side of it, and the high melt glass, or what we call dinnerware is an easy way to say it. Anything that you're going to eat with, your cups in your kitchen or your plates and that sort of thing. We'll keep track and we'll watch the percentage that kind of material that comes in, and generally from the MRFs we see a fairly low percentage of that come in, down in the 1% and 2%. And most of the time when we're talking contamination from the MRF side, we're seeing contamination of 15, 20+% with paper and plastic and those sort of things. So I tend to kind of drift towards the high percentage stuff, but yes, that we do watch that really closely. If we see an excessive amount of ceramics or stone or something coming in, and we can pin that back to a specific supply, we certainly we'll do our best to help clean that up. Even myself at one Christmas was in the kitchen and Christmas dinner, 60 people strong, and my mom drops a plate and she picked it right up and threw it in the recycling bin, and I was sitting right next to her, and I just looked at her, I'm like, Mom, did you just do that? You know what I do for a living? And she looks at me and she's like, oh my God, I'm sorry. It's just Yeah, it's kind of, nature. We want to recycle as much as possible, but the ceramics is, there isn't an end use to it. The ceramics, stones, porcelain, that sort of thing, gets kicked out in our sorting process through our optical sorters. And that will be, if you look at that stream, that waste stream coming from us, if we can keep it clean enough from organics, then that material can sometimes get used as alternative daily cover to landfills, or would even see a lot of landfills will use it as a drainage when they're building a new cell and they're putting in their drain tile and that sort of stuff. They can use it ceramic and scrap glass in situations like that, but otherwise it's just going to end up going to the landfill.
Okay, well, it sounds like the recycling educators on the call are doing a good job if they're not seeing as much ceramic. So keep with that good message. That is a good thing. So I want to make sure we get to our last expert panelist. Thanks to those who have spoken thus far. And also another reminder, just if you want to add your questions to the chat for any of our speakers, we are leaving time for that. So it is my pleasure to introduce Gordon Kenna. He is at Dekalb County, who has a great recycling program for glass. So give you the mic.
All right, terrific, Marissa. Thank you very much. For those of you that don't know, Dekalb is Georgia's fourth most populous county. We're probably the largest sanitation utility in the state. And that means we collect material from approximately 172,000 single-family residential customers each week. We often make 3 trips to each of those residences, one for trash, one for green waste, and one yard waste, and one for recyclables. We have a single stream recycling program. And for glass, we have 11 locations from fire stations and parks and other locations for drop off for glass. The glass that we collected, typically we're going something north of about 100 tons per month. It's actually a little bit down because the 135 or so Dekalb schools basically haven't been open for the last year. And we have a recycling program there, but when they're not open, they're not recycling. So we had to kind of drop those out. We expect to pick that up again beginning in the fall. We also are home to the Dekalb Farmers Market. We don't operate that. That's done by a private operator, but they have a large recycling facility, including glass. And so that's sort of another source. And then we are looking at another location in Dekalb County for a charm facility. And we're a little ways out from getting that facility fully planned and online, but we expect that to increase significantly what we're able to do and in the way of improving quality and quantity of materials that we get. So at the 11 locations that we currently operate, we're kind of looking at those to look at what the quality is. These are not facilities that are staffed, so people come in and put material in that, and for the most part they do a pretty good job, but you do find things in there that shouldn't be there. But we do try to sort of monitor that and then also monitor it for, is it achieving the kind of volume that we think is appropriate for that, so that we can service it correctly and so forth. So that's a kind of quick overview of Dekalb as an entity. Part of the difficulty, I guess, in this for us is that it's been a pretty challenging year because of COVID and kind of changes in our program. Dekalb also operates a commercial collection program for a number of businesses. And in that one, we would like to see that expanded. But again, this past year, an awful lot of the customers that might have been doing a pretty robust business, but didn't because of the past year. Obviously, we've had to kind of change that regimen as well. So coming out of this, we have an opportunity to kind of revisit where do we have the best opportunity to increase our volumes. The other thing about DeKalb that is probably unique is that we are the only county in Metro Atlanta that actually owns a landfill. And our landfill was permitted in the 70s. We've got a fair amount of capacity. We also have a glass drop-off operation there at Seminole Road, as well as other special recycling outlets for tires and so forth. But that landfill operation is unique among counties in Metro Atlanta and frankly unique or unusual for most public sanitation operations. So that's kind of where we are, and obviously it's important that we are located in relative close proximity to our contractors. So we work with Pratt pretty closely over at their Conyers facility, and that we do our best to try to meet their specifications and so forth. And then we're also fairly close to the strategic materials facility on the south side in College Park, East Point, and so that works pretty well for us. And one of the things that we're trying to kind of understand is what is the carbon footprint associated with both management of waste from a trash perspective and from recycling. And we're actually pretty well located to minimize that. And that's something we're trying to quantify and do a better job of understanding.
Great. Thanks so much, Gordon. I'm sure a lot of, I know I hear the idea of drop-off programs more frequently. I think it's interesting that your glass drop-off containers are unmanned. Can you speak a little bit more in detail about kind of education and signage? And also, are these glass locations also coupled with other opportunities to recycle, meaning that there's a single stream container and then glass on the side?
They're, like I said, they're at a variety of locations. And it really depends on how much real estate, traffic, parking, that sort of thing. And some are fire stations, most are at parks, but we just simply can't staff them. Most of them are open at long hours or even 24 hours in the case of a fire station. So there'll be people on site, but they're not actually monitoring what goes into the bin.
Mm-hmm. Are the bins marked? Can you speak to a little bit about the education, either on the bin directly or what you do as a county to kind of draw attention to those locations?
Yeah, they are marked, and we have a couple of folks who are full-time public education in the sanitation department, and that covers a host of messaging that we do for our customers, and that's everything from special collections if we're doing bulk collections, or if there's a change because of holidays and things of that nature, and then kind of re-education on recycling issues of our 170,000 plus single family residential customers. Obviously, not all of them are recycling, but we keep trying to kind of raise that. And so we take a pretty close look periodically at where the percentage of participation is in different parts, and then try to focus that education in those areas where we'd like to see it increased.
Excellent. And not to bombard you with questions, but you mentioned your commercial program. Were you talking about that for glass only or for all recyclables?
Well, it depends on the customer. And these customers are anything from, say, a small private school, a church, a relatively small business. Some of them are larger businesses. That does not mean that if you're a business in DeKalb County and you want to use a commercial contractor, you may do that. But a lot of those folks choose to use the county as their provider. And that's just a word about how that works for other counties. Relatively few counties have the capacity that we do. And most most counties operate with commercial collection companies serving both residential customers and commercial customers. So I can't really speak to how they work in that situation, whether that's Cobb or Gwinnett or one of the other large counties that doesn't have the sort of public infrastructure to manage sanitation in the way that DeKalb does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely different factors depending on where you're at. We do have a question that came in from Moses Tejuoso. What is the recycling participation from the 170,000 single family residents? I'm assuming that's going to you.
And that kind of depends. It's a great question. And I don't have a precise answer. It probably depends on where you are. We know that certain parts of town or certain parts of the county have higher rates of recycling. I should also mention that I'm talking here about unincorporated DeKalb County. Now, we also contract with certain of the cities to manage both the waste collection and the recycling programming. Turn him off. But each city then has to make their own decision about how they want to manage that process. And for example, the city of Decatur has a pretty sophisticated program. It's a relatively small city, but it's the densest city in Georgia. And they have a very aggressive recycling program. They establish their own rules. We have pretty much nothing to do with that. So I'm really speaking principally of the unincorporated areas of DeKalb County. Some areas we have probably a 90% or close to 90% participation rate. Other parts of the county have much lower rates of recycling. And so we try to focus our efforts on those areas. Those areas tend to be less densely populated.
Great.
More of the rural parts of the county.
Yeah, and I know rural recycling is something that we'll definitely want to address today for parts of Georgia. So we look forward to the collaborative sessions in the afternoon to kind of dig a little deeper in how drop-off and rural programs work throughout the states, or could work throughout the state. So I did want to draw attention. There is Don Haynes commented on the ceramics and end markets for ceramics based on manufacturing in Tennessee. So I just want to draw attention if you're thinking about end markets for ceramics. He's got a couple of comments in there, so check out the chat. We have about 4 minutes left. Do we want to just kind of do a quick round robin, and any final parting words is for that you maybe heard today or want to leave with the panelists? I'll just go based on you unmiking for the crowd. So looks like Joe, you unmiked first.
I just wanted to talk real quick about DeKalb counties and what they've done and a challenge there compared to an example that I used earlier today in a discussion where we're talking about a county outlying Georgia that has drop-off locations. Those are much easier because they're manned locations and we can control contamination. But what DeKalb did is it's a daunting task to really, first of all, come up with locations. And that's probably one of the hardest things that we have to overcome. Anytime that a county or a city or anybody who comes to us that wants to partner and do what DeKalb County is doing, there's our biggest challenge right there is finding locations where you're not going to end up with microwaves and dead cats and that kind of thing. So my hat's off to DeKalb. They do a good job of it. And they watch things just like Gordon said. They watch things, if they're in a bad location, then they're willing to move it and look at it at other spots. But thank you for your efforts that you put into your glass collections. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Oh, I'm seeing a question come in, and this is actually for strategic. So it says, does strategic, I guess it could be for DeKalb too. Does strategic directly service the DeKalb drop-offs, or does Dekalb pick up those locations and send them to SMI?
Dekalb, it manages the collections and drop off themselves. They run their own, they own and operate their own boxes and trucks.
Great. Wonderful. Well, that brings us right up to the hour. So a big virtual round of applause for our panelists. Fantastic job.